Army tactical missile systems, cluster bombs, and StarStreak missiles. All these are weapons that Ukraine has been using since Russia invaded the country in early 2022. We break down Ukraine's armory, from the tech to its potential impact. First, we look at the $1 million Storm Shadow missile.
This is the Storm Shadow cruise missile, the weapon that's providing Ukraine with the strike range it needs for its counteroffensive. These highly precise weapons have a range of over 155 miles, 3 times that of the HIMARS in Ukraine. With that kind of range, these weapons are forcing Moscow to rethink its logistics. Here's how these long-range, deep strike missiles work, and why the Storm Shadow is equipped to take out key Russian command and control centers.
The reach of a Storm Shadow, it allows Ukraine to target all of this territory you see here. So if you look here at this map of the front lines, that includes Crimea, places like Berdyansk, where there's a lot of command and control.
With a miniaturized jet engine, lightweight materials, and autonomous navigation systems, the Storm Shadow is able to travel far beyond the line of sight of the launching aircraft to complete its mission. The missile's 155-mile range is what helped Ukraine hit this bridge, more than 100 miles from the front lines, which Russian troops have relied on for supplies into the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. But the missile's strength is not just its range. Its pre-programmed targeting is also highly precise.
It is what we call a fire and forget. Once you pre-program it and you launch it, it doesn't require any updates or communication from the operator.
Compared to unguided artillery or rockets that may target a general area like an airbase, the target for a Storm Shadow can be as precise as a specific hangar of that airbase. This is possible because the missile is equipped with 3 different types of navigation: INS, GPS, and terrain contour matching. The inertial navigation system is a collection of onboard motion sensors that tracks the orientation and velocity of the missile, calculating its location without satellites. But errors can creep into the system with longer missions, so the Storm Shadow also gets periodic GPS updates.
Obviously, the most accurate way to do it would be if you just had the missile hooked up to GPS, live stream, and it constantly getting updates.
But GPS can make the missile vulnerable to counterattacks, so
that's dangerous to do in a combat environment because you have electronic warfare countermeasures. In some cases, they can spoof a GPS signal, so make it tell it's somewhere where it's not.
The third type is terrain contour matching. Using an altimeter to help establish its location, the Storm Shadow measures changes in the elevation of the terrain below it and compares it to its onboard database. All the while, the missile is flying at terrain-hugging altitude, one of many features helping the Storm Shadow evade radar detection, making it difficult to shoot down.
When something is flying high, you can see it from a long way away. If something is flying very low, it becomes hard to see because you don't have a clear line of sight.
Experts say the Storm Shadow also appears to be outfitted with additional countermeasures that make it even harder to intercept, though the exact type isn't publicly disclosed.
In general, missiles countermeasures can include things like infrared decoys, right, flares, right, things that will divert an infrared-seeking interceptor missile.
Once the missile identifies and strikes its target, experts say the Storm Shadow's impact is comparably more lethal against hardened targets because of a feature called delayed detonation. As the missile strikes its target, an initial smaller charge will detonate, pushing through walls or reinforcement. This will allow the main warhead to penetrate deep inside the target. Only then will that main warhead detonate. The delay is often milliseconds difference. But even that small amount of time allows for devastating effects. Think of it like this.
If you have a firecracker on your hand and you light it and it explodes, you'll end up with a nasty burn on your hand. If you close that firecracker around your fist and it explodes, you'll probably lose your hand.
These capabilities, range, precision, and lethal impact, have allowed Ukrainian forces to strike buildings across occupied parts of Ukraine. One attack tied to the Storm Shadow was reportedly able to hit a hotel about 95 miles behind the front lines, killing a Russian general, Lieutenant General Sokov. This attack in June marks the highest-ranking casualty among Russian forces.
So we can see the precision of the weapon at work there, being able to hit the specific part of the building that you want to hit, to even go after targets as specific as individuals.
But the estimated cost of a Storm Shadow is more than $1 million per unit, one of the most expensive strike munitions that Ukraine currently possesses. All of these features require high-end, expensive technology. So in many ways,
it has more in common with building an iPhone than it does an artillery shell.
And that cost leads to one of the biggest limitations Ukraine has with the Storm Shadow, its number of units. Britain hasn't released the number of Storm Shadows sent. Before the war, defense intelligence companies estimated that the UK had roughly 822 Storm Shadows in its arsenal. Just one example of how shallow the Storm Shadow's supply is, during the 2011 Libya intervention that brought down Muammar Gaddafi, the UK and France ran out of precision-guided munitions, including Storm Shadows.
Only a small fraction of a already small pile is going to Ukraine.
It is broadly understood that Ukraine has far less Storm Shadows than HIMARS rockets. Analysts say Ukraine should be strategic about how and when to use the Storm Shadows as a specialized piece of equipment.
They're not meant for mass bombardments like you might see with artillery. They're precision surgical battlefield instruments. They go after high-value targets, time-sensitive targets. They can't just use them to go blast some random piece of Russian artillery behind the lines.
And it's not just the number of missiles. Because it's an air-launched missile, Ukraine also needs to take stock of its aircraft supply.
Ukrainian Air Force started the war with only about 100, little over 100 combat aircraft, and only a small portion of these are Su-24s capable of firing Storm Shadow.
The Storm Shadow is equipping Ukraine with a critical capability at an important time in its counteroffensive, but the effort is moving slowly.
Most of the supplies are coming up through here, so by attacking the corridors that these supplies move through, they can slow down and complicate the delivery of munitions.
Williams said that in order for this strategy to be effective, Ukraine will need more long-range options. Currently, the UK and France are the only countries supplying Ukraine with these types of missiles, like the Storm Shadow and the nearly identical Scalp missile. Germany so far has rejected a Ukrainian request for its Taurus cruise missiles, which has an even longer range of nearly 300 miles. And the Biden administration is still deliberating whether to send its equivalent weaponry, the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, with a range of some 190 miles. As a truck-launched rocket, the ATACMS offers more opportunities for use.
It requires a lot less logistical train. You don't have to support a fighter aircraft. You don't need bases that can be out in the field.
Still, these long-range missiles in Ukraine come with parameters. When the UK Defense Secretary announced the country was supplying the Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine, he said that the weapons will allow Ukraine to push back Russian forces based within Ukraine's sovereign territory, implying a long-standing red line among the West to avoid targets inside Russia. But even with just the Storm Shadow, Ukraine has begun complicating the flow of supplies from Russia to the front lines.
The Storm Shadow missile has had a significant impact on the battlefield, is my understanding. Its accuracy and its ability to deliver successfully the payload as sent and designed. I think the key here is to recognize that if the Russians move out of range, we must work together internationally to make sure that the equipment is given to make sure they are back in range.
Ukrainian forces have repeatedly asked the U.S. for these. They're the Army Tactical Missile System, ATACMS for short. These missiles can come equipped with a 500-pound class fragmentation warhead and have a maximum range of about 190 miles, which could allow Ukrainian forces to reach further into Russian-held territories inside Ukraine, including Crimea. In September, U.S. officials said they would send a small number of ATACMS missiles to Ukraine in coming weeks, after debating the risk of escalating tensions with Russia and worrying about its small domestic stockpile.
We've been supplying Ukraine with items from our junk drawer, as opposed to the high-end missile capabilities.
Here's how these missiles could speed up Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russia, and why the U.S. was initially hesitant to send them.
ATACMS is the Army Field Artillery's premier surface-to-surface strike system. It allows them to be mobile, to disperse, to hide in terrain and clutter, and to be able to impose certain kinds of uncertainty upon the enemy about where they'll be coming from.
The ATACMS is designed to be launched from a ground vehicle, like the U.S. HIMARS, which is already in Ukraine. Once the missile is fired, the ground vehicle can shoot and scoot to avoid retaliatory attacks. This could be a huge advantage for Ukrainian forces, which have been using a similar missile, the UK's Storm Shadow, that's fired from an airborne jet.
It just offers one more level of flexibility for the counteroffensive. The other systems that require launching by air limit where and when the Ukrainians can use them. They need that air platform. This essentially empowers ground forces to take these launchers anywhere they need them.
One of the interesting features of the HIMARS launcher is that it doesn't reveal exactly what missile it's carrying. That's advantageous because assuming an enemy is surveilling you, won't necessarily know what's inside and won't know whether it is a higher value ATACMS as opposed to the shorter range stuff.
This gives Ukrainians the added advantage of firing missiles from multiple types of domains, including air and ground. But the HIMARS mobility means that Ukrainians could get closer to Russian territory, further increasing the missile's reach. ATACMS missiles can reach up to 190 miles, considerably farther than the Storm Shadow's top range of 155 miles.
There's just all kinds of operational advantages to that greater range. That reach allows, for instance, Ukrainian forces to be able to fire from safer territory, to not have to walk right up to the Russian lines to be able to hit something deeper back.
This additional range could force Moscow to move storage facilities and command centers more than 200 miles from the front. And that could complicate efforts to supply troops with food and ammunition, aiding Ukrainians in their counteroffensive. Plus,
this weapon could be useful for getting Ukrainian targeting inside some of these Russian-held territories, specifically Crimea.
ATACMS can also move significantly faster than other missiles, reaching a top speed of Mach 3, or around 2,300 miles per hour. In contrast, cruise missiles like the Storm Shadow or Russia's KH-101, for example, have top speeds of only around 600 to 700 miles per hour.
The speed of the ATACMS is simply a function of the fact that it's a ballistic missile with a big rocket engine, single stage on the back. So this speed is useful for time-critical targets, things that may move, that need to be hit very promptly.
The ATACMS guidance system combines inertial navigation with GPS. This creates highly accurate targeting, preventing electronic jamming and interference, and minimizing collateral damage on impact. ATACMS are also designed with features adept at hitting multiple types of targets. These missiles are highly maneuverable in the air, allowing them to hit targets from a variety of angles.
Simple ballistic missile is going to travel on a ballistic trajectory. It's going to just follow gravity's rainbow, something that's very predictable and curved. The benefit of maneuverability is that you can interrupt that rainbow. You can come down in a different way. You can maneuver to be more on target. You can go after perhaps a moving target and correct for errors. And yes, you can come down vertically if you'd like. So that vertical impact may be useful to come right over top of target and just make it that much harder for it to see it coming or to hit the vulnerable spot on an armored vehicle.
ATACMS missiles can contain one of two types of warheads, unitary or submunition.
A unitary warhead is just what it sounds like. It is one big explosive. It's in one piece. Submunitions or bomblets are likewise what they sound like. Lots of little things that spread out. There's advantages to both depending on what you're targeting.
Inside an ATACMS submunition warhead are hundreds of steel-cased balls filled with incendiary pellets,
which could be likened crudely to a shotgun blast, where it has a large spray of explosive impact on the target. And then there's a unitary warhead, which would be crudely likened to a single bullet out of a pistol.
Unitary warheads are better at targeting specific single targets, while submunition warheads are highly effective against moving personnel and equipment.
The unitary and the submunitions are admittedly tailored for different things, but both of them can go after lots of different targets.
So what we don't know is what variant they would provide or what combination of variants they would provide to the Ukrainians.
Despite Ukraine's requests, the U.S. was hesitant to send ATACMS until now.
There was concerns about escalating the conflict with the Russians. There's concerns that the Ukrainians could use these ATACMS which have this long range and target inside Russian territory. But we're also at a point in the counteroffensive which it's gone a lot slower than anybody expected. And so the U.S. may be digging deeper into its pockets and greenlighting other weapons systems that it didn't want to provide before, given kind of the time constraints.
The Biden administration faced increased pressure from Ukraine and Congress to send ATACMS missiles. Last June, Congress signed a bipartisan resolution in favor of sending ATACMS to Ukraine. And the administration has reversed course on weapons before, like with the Abrams tank. But officials have also expressed concern about the U.S.'s domestic ATACMS stockpile.
The U.S. is really trying to balance, its own national security needs with those of Ukraine and Europe writ large.
And the United States just doesn't have a whole lot of these lying around. They've been out of production to some extent for some time.
This recent reversal comes shortly after a U.S. Army official said that the replacement missile for the ATACMS, the PrISM, will be out of production and entering U.S. stockpiles in the near future. The PrISM, or Precision Strike Missile, can reach over 300 miles, which is significantly farther than the ATACMS.
That may also mitigate some of the impact on the U.S. inventory to provide the ATACMS. So that's kind of opening the door for potentially providing them now.
This StarStreak missile travels over 3 times the speed of sound. And following a decades-long hiatus, it's going into reproduction after the UK sent stockpiles of the Cold War-era weapon to Ukraine. This lightweight man-portable air defense system is a short-range missile that can travel approximately 4.3 miles and shoot down aircraft like drones, fighter ground attack planes, and helicopters. That's why the StarStreak may be most useful along the front lines. Ukrainian soldiers leave the bubble of protection provided from long-range missiles as they advance. But they can carry the lightweight StarStreak missiles with them or equip them on tanks like the British Alvis Stormer. Here's how the missile works and how it can uniquely equip Ukraine's air defense. At roughly 2,300 miles per hour, the StarStreak travels 100 miles per hour faster than the Stinger, a similar U.S. missile. At that speed, targets likely don't have enough time to react and evade the missile, making the StarStreak potentially more lethal. Targets also have to withstand being hit by not just one warhead, but 3. Unlike the Stinger and other missiles in this class, the StarStreak releases 3 tungsten darts toward the target after it's launched. Having 3 darts accounts for warhead failure. Even if one dart is defective, there are still 2 others. Once the darts reach the target, they embed themselves into it and explode. This maximizes the chance that the target will be destroyed. But the key distinguishing factor between the StarStreak and other man-portable missiles is its guidance system. Most, including the Stinger, are heat-seeking, meaning they use infrared systems to track the target. But heat-seeking missiles are susceptible to countermeasures, like flares. Because these other missiles track the hottest object, setting off flares can guide the missile away from the heat of the aircraft's engine and towards the flare instead. But the StarStreak is not heat-seeking, it's laser-guided. After launching the missile, the gunman projects a laser beam onto the target for the 3 darts to follow. This laser-guided system is precise and means the StarStreak can't be jammed or decoyed. But compared to fire-and-forget missiles like the Stinger, the StarStreak requires more training to use and puts a greater burden on the operator. And this manual tracking means it's more effective for slower-moving targets. As long as Russia believes Ukraine has StarStreak missiles, it may be less willing to fly into Ukraine's airspace for fear of getting shot down. And the StarStreak is uniquely equipped to handle the newer tactics deployed on the front lines, including drones. Because of their low heat signature, drones can evade heat-seeking missiles, but they're easily taken down by StarStreak missiles if operators can spot them. Yet training soldiers on the StarStreak isn't the greatest obstacle for Ukraine. The main issue is simply supply. The StarStreak was designed by the arms maker Short Brothers in the 1980s for the British government during the Cold War. It didn't see active service until 2003 in the Iraq War. Then, in 2012, it went out of mass production. But that same year, soldiers in London were equipped with StarStreak missiles to protect the city in case of an attack during the Olympics. Experts believe production stopped because the man-portable missiles like StarStreak and Stinger missiles were thought to be less crucial for the defense needs of the UK and the US at the time. But Britain retained its stockpile. After the UK and US denied Ukraine's request to create a no-fly zone over the country, the UK sent these missiles to help keep Ukraine's airspace clear from Russian aircraft.
So in response to Ukrainian requests, the government has taken the decision to explore the donation of StarStreak high-velocity man-portable anti-air missiles.
This renewed demand has led the French weapons manufacturer Thales to renew its production of StarStreak missiles. But like many weapons manufacturers, Thales has supply chain issues. These complications mean relaunching the StarStreak could take over a year. Since last March, the UK has sent numerous air defense systems and over 10,000 missiles, though the exact number of StarStreak missiles is unknown. It's also unclear how many StarStreak missiles Ukraine has left or when it will get more. But experts say that the country is strategically quiet about its air defense systems. StarStreak missiles are just one kind of man-portable missile, which is just one type of short-range missile, which is just one method of air defense. Experts say it's best practice to have multiple options to solve the same problem, which is why Ukraine has asked for a variety of weapons.
Всі прекрасно знають, що будь-який контрофенсив, будь-який у світі, без контролю в небі, дуже небезпечні.
Analysts have called this BM-21 rocket launcher the AK-47 of artillery because it's been used in almost every armed conflict since 1969. And right now, both Ukraine and Russia are using the Soviet-era weapon. Experts say it was technologically outdated in the 90s. So why is this 60-year-old rocket launcher everywhere in this war? The BM-21 can fire up to 40 unguided rockets in 20 seconds. The rockets are nearly 10 feet tall and are most commonly armed with high-explosive fragmentation warheads. When all 40 rain down, they can cover an area almost as large as 10 football fields. This heavy and indiscriminate bombardment is what gave the BM-21 the nickname Grad, Russian for hail. It's what makes the Grad effective even today. The Grad is often used to suppress fire, a tactic to provide cover for forces, and weaken the enemy before another attack. Most of the 122mm rockets have a range of 12 miles, though some can reach up to 25. So Ukraine has used it mostly along the front lines to hit Russian artillery batteries and infantry, while Russia has fired it into cities like Kherson, where a Grad rocket strike killed 5 people, and Kharkiv.
Get in here! Get in! Get in!
Experts say the Grad's main flaw is the defining part of its design, that it has no guidance system. After loading the rockets, an operator calculates the coordinates of the target and gives them to the gunman who adjusts the launcher. An operator sets the number of rockets and fires them. The results are not precise. Here, you can see that the chance a Grad rocket directly hits a human adult target is highest up to 32 feet away. By 328 feet, it's almost guaranteed to miss. However, an explosive Grad warhead has a lethal area radius of about 50 feet, and it can still severely maim someone within 100 feet. But this lack of accuracy is why it needs so many rockets to be truly effective, and that's a problem for Ukraine because analysts believe the country's original stockpile is already gone. The US said it has supplied Ukraine with 60,000 Grad rockets. But on the ground in August, some brigades in Ukraine drove around with empty launchers, and others said they were conserving ammo by choosing targets more selectively. Some Ukrainian soldiers have also taken the rocket launchers and fit them into the back of pickup trucks, creating a mini Grad. These fire at a shorter distance and use just 3 rockets at a time. But analysts say these measures may not be worth it. Since the Grad rocket is unguided, soldiers risk missing their target entirely, effectively wasting their limited supply of ammunition. The weapon has multiplied across the globe and into the arsenals of more than 50 countries, with variants like the Chinese Type 81 and Czech RM-70. But according to Action on Armed Violence, a British human rights organization, Russia is still the largest producer of the Grad's 122mm rockets. Ukraine, on the other hand, is largely at the whim of other countries to replenish its supply. And without missiles, the trucks they're mounted on offer few other benefits, especially considering that the original Ural 375D truck has absolutely no armor. The windows aren't reinforced with any special type of glass. They're basically just truck windows from the 60s and 70s. Even the newer vehicles offer little protection, just enough to protect from small arms like guns. And soldiers have said that if the Grad were to run over an anti-tank mine, everyone in the vehicle would die. Lacking protection means that it's important to pack up and leave immediately after firing, which can take up to 3 minutes for the Grad. This tactic is called the shoot and scoot, because once you've launched the rockets, the target can calculate where they came from and fire back. The BM-21 is outdated and has been effectively obsolete for decades. As a Ukrainian soldier said, it is better to ask what has not broken. The vehicle is prone to breaking down, and soldiers aren't always able to get the parts to fix it. Its successors, like the Russian BM-27 Uragan and Czech RM-70, often have improved ranges or some armor to protect the vehicle. But they still lack the precision and range of modern systems like US HIMARS. Even though it's a flawed weapon, Russia may still have an advantage because it has deeper reserves. Analysts say ultimately, the reason Ukraine still deploys the Grad is just because it already has the system in place. It's simple, but it works. That's why, despite all the problems, the BM-21 has stuck around for another war.
These are cluster munitions, a type of weapon that the US plans to send to Ukraine. The controversial bombs are prohibited by multiple countries, but they are part of an $800 million aid package the Biden administration says will strengthen Ukraine's offensive against Russian forces.
Russia has already spread tens of millions of these bomblets across Ukrainian territory.
Here's a breakdown of how the cluster munition works and why the United States plans on sending them despite humanitarian concerns. U.S. cluster munitions, also known as dual-purpose improved conventional munition, are a type of weapon that spreads small bomblets over a wide area.
What DPICMs bring to a battlefield is anti-armor and anti-personnel capability.
A common type of cluster munition is fired in artillery shells, which is what the U.S. is expected to give Ukraine. They can also be in the form of rockets, or dropped from a plane. The weapon opens midair to release tens or hundreds of smaller explosive munitions, or sub-munitions. These sub-munitions can be loaded with charges that can penetrate armor, or munitions that can strike multiple human targets across an area as large as several football fields.
Clearly a capability that would be useful in any type of offensive operations.
In Ukraine, Russia has used these munitions as far back as the first days of the invasion, according to Human Rights Watch. The group said one attack struck residential areas in Kyiv, killing at least 3 civilians. Specifically, they say Russia has used 9 M55K Smerch rockets. Those are composed of submunition containers that have a tail fin and a fuse, and sit at the front of the rocket. The submunitions are designed to attack both people and equipment. Behind those is the propellant. After the rocket is launched, the container ejects the submunitions, commonly by combining an explosive charge and a spin mechanism. When the fuse of each submunition is triggered, on the ground or in the air, it explodes. But some of them can also fail to detonate. These are referred to as duds, a common issue with cluster munitions. Duds can cause long-term hazards as they may detonate after conflicts end and harm civilians. Human rights groups say the first significant use of cluster weapons was by German and Soviet forces in World War II. The munitions released by German planes were commonly called butterfly bombs, with an attack on the British port of Grimsby killing almost as many people after the raid as during it.
This bomb may go off as soon as it's even lightly touched. It may also go off by itself up to half an hour after it's landed.
The U.S. made extensive use of cluster munitions during the Vietnam War, also dropping them in neighboring Laos. And since then, unexploded bombs dropped by American planes have killed or maimed thousands of Laotians. More recently, during the war in Iraq, the U.S. showered more than 1 million bomblets during a 3-week period of major combat. Since 2008, more than 110 countries have signed an international convention on cluster munitions that prohibits all use, transfer, production, and stockpiling of cluster bombs. Russia and Ukraine have not signed the agreement, and the U.S. is among several other NATO countries that are also not signatories.
The DPICM ammunition we are delivering to Ukraine will consist only of those with a dud rate less than 2.35%. Compare that to Russia, which has been using cluster munitions across Ukraine with dud rates of between 30 and 40%.
Cluster munitions are already being used by both sides in the war in Ukraine.
The difference is that Russia is using cluster munition to attack, to invade Ukraine. Ukraine is using cluster munition to protect itself against an aggressor.
According to Human Rights Watch, Ukraine inherited a stockpile of cluster munitions after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and the Biden administration decided to provide U.S. cluster munitions after written assurances that the weapons wouldn't be used in civilian areas.
Even allies who were signatories to the Oslo Convention, while they cannot formally support something that they've signed up to a convention against, have indicated both privately and many of them publicly over the course of today that they understand our decision.
The Pentagon says the cluster munitions could be effective when used against Russian armored formations and trench lines. And U.S. officials have defended the decision to supply the weapons as necessary to prevent Ukraine from running low on artillery ammunition at a critical stage in the conflict.
By providing Ukraine with DPICM artillery ammunition, we will ensure that the Ukrainian military has sufficient artillery ammunition for many months to come.